"Where is it, you little thief?" Davies hissed, face purple. Not asking, accusing. Clara Ara's blood turned to ice. Finch's black card, gone. But Davies, greasy and small, he wouldn't understand. See, her mother, lungs turning to stone, needed a miracle. 250,000, a sum she'd never see. And Davies, he just thought of himself. Her secret? That card wasn't buying her a fancy life. It was buying her mother one. They had no idea how her quiet kindness would change everything. Now a knock. A man in a suit. Mr. Finch would like a word. He expected greed theft or perhaps a panicked phone call. What he got was a multi-million-dollar transaction that didn't justify his expectations. It shattered his entire perception of humanity and set in motion a chain of events that would change countless lives, starting with his own. The Gilded Spoon wasn't the kind of place Alistair Finch typically frequented. It was respectable, certainly clean with crisp white tablecloths and the low, pleasant hum of civilized conversation. But it lacked the ostentatious flair of the establishments he usually conducted business in. There were no Michelin stars here, no celebrity chefs screaming in the kitchen. It was, in a word, ordinary, and that was precisely why he was there. Dressed in a worn tweed jacket and a simple unbranded polo shirt, Alistair looked less like the titan of industry who helmed Finch Industries and more like a retired history professor enjoying a solitary lunch. He watched the staff with a predator's stillness. His gaze, usually sharp enough to make corporate raiders sweat, was softened, observational. He wasn't here for the steak frights, which were surprisingly decent. He was here to hunt, not for a company to acquire or a rival to dismantle, but for something far rarer, a person of unimpeachable character, his philanthropic arm. The Finch Foundation was a behemoth with a $10 billion endowment. Its mission was to enact real tangible change in healthcare and education, but its last CEO, a charismatic man with a dazzling resume, had been quietly siphoning funds into offshore accounts for years. The betrayal had cost the foundation millions and more. Importantly, it had cost Alistair a piece of his faith in humanity. He'd vowed the next leader would be different. They wouldn't be found on LinkedIn or through a high-priced headhunter. They would be found here in the real world, tested by a trial of his own design. His waitress for the day was a young woman named Clara Ara Evans. He'd learned her name by watching her name tag as she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long, grueling shifts. There were faint lavender-hued shadows under her eyes, but her smile was genuine when she took his order, and she treated the elderly couple at the adjacent table with a gentle patience that caught his attention. She wasn't just going through the motions. There was a core of decency to her. But decency was easy when the stakes were low. Alistair dealt in a world where the stakes were astronomical. "Will there be anything else for you, sir?" Clara Ara asked, her voice soft but clear. "Just the check." "Thank you," Alistair replied, offering a polite, forgettable smile. She returned a moment later, placing the small leather billfold on the table. "Thank you for dining with us. Please take your time." Alistair watched her walk away. He noted the slight wear on the soles of her sensible black shoes. He saw the flicker of exhaustion in her posture before she straightened it, readying herself for the next table. He pulled out the weapon for his little social experiment, the American Express Centurion card. Forged from anodized titanium, its weight was substantial, its presence commanding. Known colloquially as the Black Card, it was an icon of unimaginable wealth, a key that could unlock almost any door. It had no preset spending limit. He tucked the card into the billfold, leaving a generous tip in cash beside it. He slid the cash under the saucer of his empty espresso cup. Then, with a final lingering look at Clara Ara, as she took an order from a demanding family across the room, he stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out of the Gilded Spoon, intentionally leaving the billfold and the black card behind. He got into the back of a discreet black sedan parked a block away, where his longtime head of security and confidant, Arthur Vance, was waiting. "Sir, how was lunch?" Arthur asked, his eyes meeting Alistair's in the rearview mirror. "The steak was adequate," Alistair said, his gaze fixed on the restaurant's entrance. "The experiment is now underway." Arthur sighed. He was a man of 60 with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and he'd been with Alistair for 30 years. He disapproved of these games, as he called them. Alistair, is this really necessary? There are more conventional ways to vet a candidate. Conventional methods gave me Mark Renshaw, who stole $12 million intended for children's hospitals. Alistair countered, his voice turning to ice. Conventional methods are for conventional problems. The rot in this world is unconventional. I need someone who, when handed a blank check from the devil, uses it to buy a ticket to heaven. Let's see what Miss Evans does. He settled back into the leather seat. He had systems in place. The card would trigger an immediate silent alert on his and Arthur's phones the second it was used, detailing the amount, time, and vendor. He had a private investigator, a man named Peterson, ready to be activated with a single text. In his mind, there were only a few possible outcomes. The most likely, she'd see the name A. Finch realized who he was and panicked, calling the restaurant manager and trying to return it. A good sign, but predictable. The second, more cynical possibility, she'd see the card, understand its power, and make a small, untraceable purchase, gas, groceries, testing the waters. Or perhaps she'd go big, a shopping spree at Chanel, or a down payment on a car. That would be an instant disqualification. The one thing he didn't account for was the possibility that Clara Ara Evans would do something so audacious, so profoundly unexpected, that it would not only make him question his test, but the very nature of the world he thought he knew so well. He settled in to wait. The trap was set. Now he would see if he had caught a thief or a saint. The lunch rush at the Gilded Spoon was a frantic, chaotic ballet. Clara Ara moved through it like a seasoned performer, juggling plates, refilling drinks, and forcing smiles for customers who saw her as little more than a pair of hands. Her mind, however, was miles away in the sterile beige room of St. Jude's Community Hospital, where her mother, Elena, was fighting a battle against a rare and aggressive form of pulmonary fibrosis. The disease was slowly turning her mother's lungs to stone, and the only experimental treatment that showed any promise was not covered by their threadbare insurance. The cost was a soul-crushing $250,000. Clara Ara's meager salary and tips barely covered the rent on their tiny apartment and the mounting co-pays for basic care. Every smile she gave, every enjoy your meal, was a performance masking a scream of desperation. When the rush finally subsided, she began clearing tables, her body aching with a familiar fatigue. She reached the corner table where the quiet man in the tweed jacket had been sitting. She collected his plates and saw the cash tip, $50 on a $40 meal. A pang of gratitude warmed her. That $50 was another small drop in an ocean of debt, but it was something. Then her fingers brushed against the leather billfold. She frowned. He'd forgotten his wallet. She picked it up, its weight surprisingly heavy. A flicker of annoyance went through her. Now she'd have to hand it to her manager, Mr. Davies, who would undoubtedly make a passive-aggressive comment about her attentiveness. She opened it, hoping to find a business card or a phone number to contact the owner directly. And then she saw it, the American Express Centurion card. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was an artifact from another universe. Black, sleek, and minimalist, with the name of Finch embossed in silver. Clara Ara had seen pictures of these cards in magazines. They were invitation on, reserved for the global elite. The stories about them were legendary. Card holders had supposedly bought sports cars, chartered private jets, and even once purchased a racehorse with a single swipe. Her heart began to pound a frantic drum against her ribs. She snapped the wallet shut, her eyes darting around the now empty dining room. This changed everything. This wasn't just some forgotten Visa card. This belonged to someone immensely powerful. The name A. Finch rang a distant bell, but she couldn't place it. She quickly walked towards the manager's office, her duty clear. But as she walked, a dark, insidious thought crept into her mind unbidden. A card with no limit. What did that even mean? Could it really buy anything? Could it buy an experimental treatment? Could it buy her mother more time? She shook her head, horrified at the direction of her thoughts. Stealing was not in her nature. Her parents had raised her with a rigid sense of right and wrong. She was about to knock on the manager's door when it swung open. Mr. Davis stood there, a man whose SM greasy as the kitchen's fryer. He was short with a comb-over that did little to hide his baldness, and he peered at the world through small, suspicious eyes. "What is it, Evans?" he snapped, already annoyed. "Sir, a customer left his wallet." "Table 7. She held it out. Davies snatched it from her hand. He opened it, and his eyes widened comically as he saw the black card. A low whistle escaped his lips. A Finch and Amex Black. He looked at Clara Ara, and a sly, predatory gleam entered his eyes. "Did you look inside?" "Just to find an ID, sir," she said, her voice tight. "Right," he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. He tapped the card thoughtfully. Well, we'll just put this in the safe. If Mr. Finch wants it back, he can come and claim it." He started to turn away. "Shouldn't we try to contact him?" Clara Ara pressed. "A card like that, he must be worried." Davies turned back slowly, his smile unpleasant. "Restaurant policy. Evans, we hold lost items for 24 hours. It's not our job to play detective." He paused, looking her up and down. "Besides, a man with a card like this probably has a dozen more. He's not worried. Now get back to work. Section 3 needs polishing." Clara Ara watched him disappear into his office, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet hallway. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Davies wasn't going to try to return it. She knew his type. He would wait, hoping the owner wouldn't return. And what then? What would a man like Davies do with a card he thought was untraceable? The possibilities made her skin crawl. He wouldn't use it for something noble. He'd likely try to buy a new car or a fancy watch, something that would immediately be flagged, getting him arrested and potentially implicating the entire restaurant, including her. She returned to her duties, but her mind was a whirlwind. The image of the card was burned into her brain. It represented a level of financial freedom so absolute it was abstract. It was the power to solve any problem with a simple transaction. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her older brother, Leo. "Mom had a bad night. Doctors are talking about palliative care again." The words hit her like a physical blow. Palliative care. The words were a death sentence. They were giving up, all for a lack of money. Clara Ara leaned against the wall in the staff corridor, the smell of bleach and old grease filling her nostrils. The injustice of it all crashed down on her. A man could have so much money he could forget a limitless credit card on a table, while her mother, a good woman who had worked hard her entire life, was suffocating to death because they couldn't afford the one thing that might save her. The internal battle was ferocious. Her conscience screamed at her. A lifetime of ingrained morality wearing against the primal, desperate need to save her mother. Stealing was wrong. It was a line she had never even considered crossing. But was it stealing to use the resources of a man who wouldn't even notice they were gone to save a life? Was it a sin to rebalance the scales just for a moment? Later that evening, as she was clocking out an idea, began to form a plan so terrifying and audacious that it made her feel light-aided. It wasn't about stealing for herself. It wasn't about a shopping spree. It was about something bigger. She thought about Mr. Davies and the card sitting in his office safe. She knew he stayed late on Tuesdays to do inventory, often leaving his office unlocked while he was in the storeroom. The seed of the idea was planted. It was wrong. It was illegal. It could land her in prison. But as she walked out into the cold night air, the image of her mother gasping for breath filled her mind, and she knew she couldn't just do nothing. The weight of temptation was crushing, but the weight of her mother's fading life was heavier still. The next 2 days were a blur of torment for Clara Ara. At the restaurant, she was a ghost performing her duties with mechanical precision while her mind raced. Every time she walked past Mr. Davies' office, she felt a jolt of anxiety. The card was in there, a sleeping dragon of infinite power, guarded by a petty, greedy man. At the hospital, she sat by her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand, the rhythmic, labored hiss of the oxygen machine, counting down the seconds of a life she was desperate to save. Dr. Lena Hansen, her mother's pulmonologist, had spoken to her again. She was a compassionate woman with weary eyes that had seen too much loss. Clara Ara, the new shipment of Osanatant, was supposed to arrive last week. She explained, her voice low and apologetic. "It's the key drug in the trial. But the manufacturer, Medstream Supplies, is having production issues. Even if you had the money, we can't get the drug. The entire hospital network is on back order. The news was a gut punch. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was a supply chain failure, a logistical nightmare that was costing lives. The unfairness was staggering. A solution existed, but it was sitting on a shelf somewhere, tangled in corporate red tape. That night, unable to sleep, Clara Ara sat at her small kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her pale, determined face. She wasn't a thief, and she wasn't a fool. If she was going to do this, she couldn't be reckless. She couldn't just buy a designer bag or a fancy car. That would be simple, selfish theft. What was brewing in her mind was something else entirely. It was a rescue mission. With trembling fingers, she typed Medstream Supplies into the search bar. The company was a mid-sized medical supplier based in Delaware. Their stock prices were in a slump. A recent news article detailed their struggles. A hostile takeover attempt had failed, leaving them cash poor and unable to scale up production of several key products, including the life-saving drug Osanitin. They had inventory, the article mentioned, but lacked the capital to sort out the logistics and distribution contracts. They were stuck. An idea what and brilliance sparked in the darkness of her despair. What if she didn't just buy one dose of the drug? What if she didn't just solve her problem? The card belonged to a Finch. She had finally Googled the name. Alistair Finch. The reclusive, genius billionaire behind Finch Industries. A man whose net worth was estimated to be north of $50 billion. To him, a few million was a rounding error. He wouldn't even feel it. Her plan began to solidify, moving from a desperate fantasy to a concrete sequence of actions. It was terrifyingly simple and breathtakingly complex. She wouldn't just use the card to pay for her mother's treatment. She would use the card to solve the very problem that was preventing the treatment. She would buy the entire available stock of Ozanet from Medstream Supplies, all of it, and she wouldn't have it shipped to her. She would have it delivered directly to St. Jude's Community Hospital and a dozen other hospitals in the network as an anonymous donation. It was an act of larceny on a grand scale, but its purpose was purely philanthropic. It was a Robin Hood fantasy brought to life by a desperate waitress with a billionaire's forgotten credit card. She would be stealing, yes, but she would be stealing to save lives. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Could an act be truly evil if its consequences were so profoundly good? She spent hours researching. She found Medstream's public financials, their inventory reports, and the direct contact information for their head of sales, a man named George Peterson. She calculated the approximate cost. It would be in the millions. The sheer audacity of it made her dizzy, but it also filled her with a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. The final piece of the puzzle was getting the card. She knew Davies's routine. On Thursday nights, he took his dinner break at exactly 8:15 p.m. in the back alley, smoking a cheap cigar and talking loudly on his phone. He always left his office unlocked for those 10 minutes. The next evening, Thursday, felt like the longest day of her life. Every minute stretched into an eternity. Her hands shook as she served coffee. At 8:14 p.m., she saw Davies head toward the back door, her heart hammered against her ribs. It was now or never. She walked calmly down the staff corridor, her steps feeling both heavy and light. As she had predicted, the door to his office was slightly ajar. She slipped inside, closing it gently behind her. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and cheap air freshener. The safe was under his desk. She knelt her fingers, fumbling with the handle. It was unlocked. Of course it was. Davies was arrogant and careless. Inside, nestled amongst petty cash envelopes, was the leather billfold. She pulled out the black titanium card. It felt cold and heavy in her palm like a loaded gun. She took a deep, shuddering breath, slipped the card into her apron pocket, and walked out, her face a mask of calm. No one saw her. Back in the noisy restaurant, she felt strangely detached, as if she were watching herself in a movie. The decision was made. The die was cast. She wasn't just Clara Ara Evans, the struggling waitress, anymore. She was about to commit a multi-million-dollar crime, and she had never been more certain that it was the right thing to do. Clara Ara finished her shift in a daze. She nodded and smiled at her coworkers, her movements automatic, her mind a universe away. She declined their usual offer for a post-work drink, claiming exhaustion, which wasn't a lie. The walk home was surreal. The city lights of Boston blurred around her, the sounds of traffic fading into a dull roar. The titanium card was a cold, heavy square in her pocket, a constant reminder of the monumental line she was about to cross. In her small apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat at the kitchen table, the card and her phone laid out before her like instruments for a delicate surgery. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear. Prison, public humiliation, the end of her life as she knew it. But then she pictured her mother's face, the slight blue tint to her lips, the struggle for every breath. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She dialed the number for George Peterson, the head of sales at Medstream Supplies. It was past 10 p.m. on the East Coast. She was counting on him being a workaholic, the kind of person who kept his business line on at all hours. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy and irritated. "Petersonen?" "Mr. Peterson, my name is Claire Vance," she said, using a slight variation of her name and pitching her voice lower, trying to sound confident and professional. "I apologize for the late hour, but I represent a private philanthropic interest that requires immediate action." There was a pause. Philanthropic interest. Who is this? The name of the foundation is not important at this stage. What is important is your available stock of Osinatant, Clara Ara said, her heart pounding. She had rehearsed this. "Our information suggests you have a significant inventory that you are unable to move due to logistical and capital constraints. Is that correct?" The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Our inventory is a matter of internal company record," Peterson said wearily. "Mr. Peterson, I'm not here to negotiate patents. I'm here to buy your entire current stock, all of it. Tonight we will pay a 10% premium over your standard wholesale price contingent on one condition. You begin overnight priority freight shipment of the entire inventory, distributed proportionally to a list of hospitals I'm about to provide, with the first shipments leaving your warehouse within 3 hours." Peterson laughed a short, incredulous bark. "Lady, do you have any idea what you're talking about? We're talking about a shipment valued at over $3 million. We don't just ship it based on a phone call." This was the moment of truth. Clara Ara took a breath. "I understand your hesitation, so let's handle the payment right now. Do you have a secure terminal in front of you?" "This is insane," he muttered, but she could hear the clacking of a keyboard. The greed was starting to outweigh the suspicion. A multi-million-dollar sale in a single night would save his quarterly numbers and make him a hero. "Okay, I'm at a payment portal, but this won't work. A transaction this large will be declined. Just try it," Clara Ara said softly. She read the numbers from the Centurion card, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. She gave the name A. Finch and the expiration date. She even created a plausible billing address on the spot one for a corporate suite in a downtown tower she'd passed earlier. "Okay, it's in," Peterson said, his voice laced with skepticism. "I'm telling you, this is going to get red flagged in about 5 seconds. The amount is $3,775,000. Running it now." Clara Ara held her breath. The silence stretched for an eternity. She could hear the hum of her refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren. Then Peterson's voice came back no longer groggy or skeptical, but filled with pure, unadulterated shock. "My God, approved. The transaction is approved." Miles away in the penthouse of the Finch Tower, 2 phones buzzed simultaneously, cutting through the quiet of Alistair's study. Alistair and Arthur both looked down at their screens. The alert was stark, displayed in a secure encrypted app. Vendor Medstream Supplies, LLC, amount $475,000. Time 221:17 ES, status approved. Alistair stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the information. $3.5 million. Not at Gucci. Not at a Ferrari dealership. Not at a high-end jeweler at a medical supply company in Delaware. Arthur broke the stunned silence. "Sir, what is Medstream Supplies?" Alistair was already typing furiously on his tablet, his face a mask of intense concentration. "They're a mid-tier pharmaceutical distributor. They've been in financial trouble for months. Why? Why in God's name would a waitress from the Gilded Spoon make a multi-million-dollar saw purchase from them? His first thought was that the card had been stolen from her and was being used by a professional criminal syndicate. But that didn't make sense. A professional would have liquidated it through untraceable assets like gold or crypto, not a direct purchase from a legitimate company. This was specific. It was targeted. "Cancel the card," Arthur said, his voice urgent. "We have to shut it down." "No," Alistair said, holding up a hand. The hunt had suddenly become infinitely more interesting. This wasn't the petty theft he had anticipated. This was something else entirely. It was a move so bizarre, so completely outside the realm of his predictions, that it had his full undivided attention. "Don't cancel anything. I want to know where this is going." "Peterson," he barked, not looking up from his screen. "Sir, my private investigator, get him on the line. I want him to find out who just received a very large, unexpected order from Medstream Supplies. And I want to know everything there is to know about Clara Evans, her family, her friends, her finances, her mother's dog's name, if she has one. Everything. I want the information on my desk by morning." Alistair leaned back in his chair, a slow, perplexed smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. The game had changed. The waitress hadn't just taken the bait. She had stolen the entire fishing boat and was sailing it to parts unknown. And for the life of him, he couldn't wait to find out why. The first shipment from Medstream arrived at St. Jude's Community Hospital at 4:52 a.m. It wasn't a small box delivered by a courier. It was a refrigerated semi-truck that backed up to the loading dock with a loud hiss of its air brakes. The night shift logistics manager, a weary man named Frank, looked at the manifest with disbelief. It detailed a massive quantity of ozonitant, enough to treat every patient in their network for 6 months, with a note that read, "Paid in full, anonymous donation." Frank made a phone call that started a chain reaction up the hospital's command structure. By 6 a.m., Dr. Lena Hansen was standing in the hospital's pharmacy, staring at pallets of the drug she thought was months away from being available. It felt like a miracle. "Where did this come from?" she asked the hospital administrator, her voice filled with awe. "We don't know," he replied, equally stunned. "The paperwork just says it's an anonymous donation. The payment was processed through the supplier directly. It's all legitimate, Lotto. This is a game changer for all our patients." Dr. Hansen immediately thought of Elena Evans. She rushed to her floor, her heart soaring with a hope she hadn't felt in weeks. She found Clara asleep in the uncomfortable visitor's chair next to her mother's bed. Clara had come straight from her errand, too wired and terrified to go home. "Clara," Dr. Hansen said, gently touching her shoulder. Clara jolted awake, her eyes wide with panic. "Is she okay? Did something happen?" "She's stable," Dr. Hansen said, a huge smile breaking across her face. "Clara, I don't know how or why, but we've had a miracle. A massive anonymous donation of Ozonet arrived this morning. We have enough. We can start your mother on the full treatment protocol today." The relief that washed over Clara was so total and overwhelming that she began to sob, burying her face in her hands. They were tears of joy, of terror, of absolution. It had worked. She had actually done it. She had pulled a star from the sky. Meanwhile, at the Gilded Spoon, a different kind of storm was brewing. Mr. Davies had discovered the billfold was missing from his unlocked safe that morning. He flew into a rage, immediately suspecting Clara. He had seen the way she looked at the card. He tore through the staff room, searched her locker, and when he found nothing, he called her phone, leaving a string of furious, threatening voicemails. When Clara finally arrived for her shift that afternoon, exhausted but buoyed by the news about her mother, Davies cornered her before she could even clock in. "Where is it, you little thief?" he hissed, his face purple with rage. He had dragged her into his office, the door shut tight. "Where is what, Mr. Davies?" Clara asked, her voice shaking, but her gaze steady. "Don't play dumb with me." "The black card, Finch's wallet. I know you took it. I'm calling the police right now and they'll search you, your apartment, everything." Clara's blood ran cold. This was the part of the plan. She hadn't thought through the fallout. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Liar," he spat. "A man like that, he'll press charges. You'll be ruined. Your life will be over. But I can make this go away." A cunning look replaced the anger. You give me the card and a cut of whatever you've already spent, and I forget this ever happened. 50%. That's my offer. Clara Ara stared at him, disgust rising in her throat. He didn't care about the restaurant's reputation or about doing the right thing. He just wanted a piece of the pie. He assumed she had gone on a shopping spree that she had stolen out of simple greed, just as he would have. I didn't take it, she said, her voice firm. The standoff was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Before Davies could answer, it opened and a man in an expensive-looking suit stepped inside. He was tall with graying temples and an air of quiet authority. It was Arthur Vance. "Mr. Davies," Arthur said, his voice polite but firm as steel. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm head of personal security for Mr. Alistair Finch. I believe you have something of his." Davies's jaw dropped. He paled, stammering. "Yes, of course, the wallet. Your employee here." He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. "Seems to have misplaced it after I secured it." Arthur's gaze shifted to Clara. It was not accusatory, but intensely analytical, like a scientist studying a strange, new specimen. He saw her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, but also the defiant set of her jaw. He had read the preliminary report from the investigator. He knew about her mother. He knew about St. Jude's. He knew more or less what had happened, but knowing the facts and understanding the motive were two different things. "Ms. Evans," Arthur said, his tone softening slightly. "Mr. Finch would like a word with you. He is waiting in his car outside." The world seemed to tilt under Clara Ara's feet. It was over. The billionaire himself was here. She was going to be arrested. She thought of her mother finally getting the medicine she needed, and a strange sense of peace settled over her fear. It was worth it. Whatever came next, it was worth it. Without a word, she looked at the sputtering Mr. Davis, then at the implacable Arthur Vance, and nodded. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll go." The ride in Alistair Finch's car was the most unnerving experience of Clara Ara's life. It wasn't a flashy limousine, but a custom-built Maybach, the interior silent as a tomb and smelling faintly of rich leather and old money. Arthur sat in the front passenger seat while Clara sat in the back across from Alistair Finch himself. He was no longer the unassuming professor from the restaurant. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, the man radiated an aura of immense power and intelligence. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out of the window, his face unreadable as the city slid by. The silence was a crushing weight. Clara Ara expected shouting accusations, the cold click of handcuffs. Instead, there was just this unnerving, profound quiet. The car didn't go to a police station. It pulled into the private underground garage of the towering glass and steel skyscraper that bore his name, Finch Tower. They were led to a private elevator that rocketed them upwards without a sound. They emerged into a sprawling penthouse office with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the entire city. "Please have a seat," Alistair said, his voice calm and even. It was the first thing he'd said to her. He gestured to a leather armchair that probably cost more than her car. Arthur remained standing by the door, a silent sentinel. Clara Ara sat perching on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Alistair sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply observing her, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Finally, he slid a single piece of paper across the polished surface of the desk. It was a print out of the transaction receipt from Medstream Supplies. 3,475,000 holes on stalls. "I conduct experiments," Alistair began, his voice a low murmur. "I like to understand what motivates people. Greed, fear, ambition. They are the engines of our world. So I leave a temptation, a key to a kingdom on a table, and I wait to see what kind of person picks it up." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "I confess, Miss Evans, you have broken my experiment. I anticipated larceny, not large-scale clandestine philanthropy. You stole my credit card and used it to anonymously donate several million worth of a rare cancer drug to a network of underfunded hospitals. My investigator's report," he tapped a thick file on his desk, "tells me the what. It tells me about your mother, Elelenina. It tells me about her diagnosis. It even tells me that the first dose of her new treatment was administered this morning. What it doesn't tell me is why. Why this? Why not pay off your mortgage? Why not disappear to a country with no extradition treaty? Why buy medicine for hundreds of strangers? The question hung in the air. Clara Ara had expected to be defending an act of theft. She hadn't expected to be defending an act of charity. She took a shaky breath and found her voice, because it wasn't just about my mother. She said her words quiet but firm. When I found out the drug was available, but the hospital couldn't get it because of a supply problem. It wasn't fair. It's not fair that someone's life depends on a company's stock price or a logistical failure. My mother is one person, but what about all the others? The ones who don't have a daughter desperate enough to do what I did. She looked him straight in the eye, the fear finally giving way to conviction. You have more money than you could ever spend. You wouldn't miss it. But for those people, it's the difference between life and death. I didn't see your card as a key to a kingdom for myself. I saw it as a tool that was being wasted, a powerful tool sitting in a rich man's wallet when it could be out in the world doing some good. So I used it. It was wrong. I know it was wrong, but I can live with being a thief. I couldn't live with myself if my mother and all those other people died when I had the power to stop it. Alistair leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He was silent for what felt like an hour. He had spent his life surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, people who schemed and plotted for a fraction of his wealth. He built firewalls of cynicism around himself to protect from the endless onslaught of greed. And this young woman, with her worn-out shoes and fierce, honest eyes, had just blasted a hole right through them. She hadn't just passed his test of integrity, she had rejected the test itself. She had seen a broken system and with his own money had performed a breathtakingly audacious act of social arbitrage. She hadn't just thought about her own problem, she had diagnosed and solved the root cause of the problem for everyone. It was the kind of thinking he valued most, systemic, empathetic, and ruthlessly efficient. He had been looking for a CEO for his foundation. Someone with integrity, yes, but also with vision. Someone who understood that real change wasn't about writing checks, but about fixing the broken machinery of the world. He thought he'd have to spend months searching, interviewing the best and brightest from Ivy League schools and top corporations. He was wrong. The perfect candidate had been serving him coffee for less than $20 an hour. "Arthur," Alistair said, his voice resonating with a finality that made Clara Ara flinch. "Sir," Arthur responded, "please contact the Boston Police Department. I need to report a crime." Clara Ara's heart plummeted. It was over. The brief flicker of hope was extinguished. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. "Tell them," Alistair continued, a slow smile spreading across his face, "that the manager of a restaurant called the Gilded Spoon, a Mr. Davis, is attempting to blackmail one of my employees." Clara Ara's eyes snapped open. She stared at Alistair Finch, a whirlwind of confusion clouding her mind. "One of my employees." The words didn't compute. Alistair saw the shock on her face. He gestured towards the phone on his desk where Arthur was now speaking in low official tones. "Mr. Davies made a critical error in judgment," Alistair explained coolly. "He assumed you acted out of the same grubby self-interest that governs his own life. When he attempted to extort you, he crossed a line. I can forgive an act of grand-scale life-saving larceny. I can't, however, tolerate a man who preys on those he perceives to be weaker than himself." The pieces began to click into place for Clara, but the resulting picture was still too surreal to believe. I don't understand. I stole from you. I committed a felony." "Technically," Alistair corrected, steepling his fingers, "you facilitated an anonymous donation on my behalf. A very, very aggressive one, I'll admit. But given the circumstances, I've decided to retroactively approve the expenditure. Consider it the first official act of the new CEO of the Finch Foundation." Clara's jaw literally dropped. She felt elated as if the air in the penthouse office had suddenly become too thin. The what?" "The position of Chief Executive Officer of my philanthropic foundation is vacant," Alistair said, his tone shifting from analytical to direct. "It is a role that requires more than just business acumen and a prestigious degree. It requires a fierce moral compass. It requires the ability to see a problem not just as it affects one person, but as it affects a whole system. It requires the audacity to implement radical solutions. For the last 2 days, Miss Evans, you have been engaged in the most unconventional job interview of my career, and you have passed with flying colors. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet in front of her. He was no longer a judge, but a prospective partner. I need someone to run my foundation who understands what it's like to be on the other side of the glass. Someone who knows that a person's life is worth more than a corporate supply chain. I need someone who, when handed unlimited resources, doesn't think, what can I buy for myself, but what problem can I solve for everyone? That person is you, Clara. The offer was so immense, so life-altering that Clara couldn't speak. She thought of her years of waitressing, of the constant grinding anxiety about money, of the condescension from people like Mr. Davies, of the heartbreaking helplessness she felt at her mother's bedside. And now this man was offering her a chance to fight those battles, not just for herself, but for thousands of others. He was offering her an army. Why? She finally whispered. Why would you trust me? Because you didn't ask for my trust, he said simply. You earned it. You took an incredible risk, not for personal gain, but for the greater good. That is the rarest quality in the world. The salary for the position is $1 million a year plus full benefits. The foundation will, of course, be assuming all of your mother's medical expenses, ensuring she gets the absolute best care available for as long as she needs it. You will have a budget of billions at your disposal. Your first task, he added with a slight smile, will be to conduct a full audit of Medstream supplies. I have a feeling the Finch Foundation might be interested in acquiring them and fixing their production problems permanently. Tears began to stream down Clara's face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of overwhelming cathartic release. The weight she had been carrying for so long was suddenly lifted. Just then, Arthur finished his call. Sir, the Boston PD are on their way to the Gilded Spoon. They were very interested to hear about Mr. Davies' extortion attempt. They were also grateful for the tip regarding his history of skimming from the register which your investigator uncovered. Alistair nodded. Thank you, Arthur. He turned back to Clara. The choice is yours. Of course, you can decline my offer and we can part ways. The donation will stand and there will be no legal repercussions for you, or you can accept and we can begin the work of changing the world. What do you say, Miss Evans? Clara looked out the vast window at the city, sprawling below, a city full of people just like her, fighting their own desperate battles. She had been given a chance to be their champion. She wiped the tears from her cheeks, stood up, and met the billionaire's gaze with a newfound strength. Yeah, she said, her voice clear and steady. Yes, Mr. Finch, I accept. 6 months later, the name Clara Evans was no longer whispered in the hushed corridors of St. Jude's as a mythical anonymous benefactor. Instead, it was spoken with respect in boardrooms, hospitals, and community centers across the country. The transformation was staggering. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a confident, incisive leader who moved with a purpose that inspired everyone she met. Her office on the floor just below Alistair's was a testament to her new role. One wall was a massive whiteboard covered in flowcharts and logistics plans, mapping out systemic solutions to healthcare deserts and educational funding gaps. She hadn't just accepted the job. She had seized it. Her first act as CEO was indeed the acquisition of Medstream Supplies. With the full backing of the Finch Foundation's capital, she didn't just buy the company, she revolutionized it. She streamlined production, slashed bureaucratic red tape, and implemented a new compassionate pricing model for underfunded hospitals, ensuring that profit margins never stood in the way of saving lives. The company, once failing, was now a paragon of ethical enterprise. Oxenitant and dozens of other critical medications were now abundant and affordable. Her mother, Elanina, was living proof of her success. Receiving the best care money could buy, the experimental treatment had worked wonders. While her lungs would never fully recover, the disease's progression had been halted. She was back in their old apartment, now renovated and mortgage-free. Breathing easily, a vibrant light returned to her eyes. She watched her daughter on the news one evening, announcing a new scholarship program for underprivileged students, and her heart swelled with a pride so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Alistair Finch found himself more energized than he had been in decades. He had intended to hire an administrator. Instead, he had found a visionary. Clara Ara challenged him, questioned his old assumptions, and brought a raw human perspective to their work that his wealth had insulated him from. They developed a deep symbiotic partnership built on mutual respect. He provided the resources and the high-level strategy. She provided the ground-level insight and the unrelenting passion. One evening, he found her staring out her office window, much as he often did from his own a floor above. "Long day?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She turned, a warm smile gracing her lips. "A productive one. We just finalized the funding for a mobile medical clinic that will serve 3 rural counties in Appalachia, the kind of place where people have to drive 2 hours to see a doctor." "That's excellent work," he said, genuinely impressed. "It felt necessary," she replied, her gaze drifting back to the city lights. "I keep thinking about how many people are out there, just one piece of bad luck away from disaster, one diagnosis, one layoff, one broken down car. We can't fix everything, but we can build better safety nets. We can fix the broken systems." Alistair walked further into the room, standing beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "when I left that card on the table, I was at my most cynical. I expected to confirm my belief that people are inherently selfish, that given the chance, they will always take for themselves." He looked at her, his usual guarded expression softening. "You didn't just prove me wrong, Clara. You gave me something I thought I'd lost for good, a reason to be optimistic. You didn't just see a blank check. You saw a blueprint for a better world." Clara's smile widened. "It was your check, Alistair. I just drew up the plans." The air between them was charged with more than just professional respect. It was the camaraderie of two people who, from opposite ends of the universe, had found a shared purpose. The test was long over. The real work had just begun, and for the first time, Alistair Finch was not alone in his quest to mend the world. He had found his equal not in a boardroom, but across the worn-out counter of a restaurant, all because he dared to ask a question, and she dared to provide an answer he could never have imagined. In a world that often feels divided and cynical, Clara Ara's story is a powerful reminder that our choices define us, especially when we're faced with temptation. She was handed a key to unlimited personal wealth, but instead of opening a door for herself, she built a bridge for countless others. Her decision shows that true power isn't about what you can acquire, but what you can contribute. It proves that empathy, intelligence, and audacity can be a force for incredible change, capable of rewriting not just one life, but the systems that govern us all. This story is a testament to the quiet heroes living among us, proving that a single act of selfless courage can ripple outwards, creating a tidal wave of hope. If this story informed you or made you think, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. What would you have done with the card? Let us know in the comments below.